Alhamdulillah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Sayyidina Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. Day 6. We continue to talk about the Sacred Life Project. Well, we talked about yesterday, or in the last segment, we talked about how the Quranic Arabic language transformed the Arabs. And it essentially boils down to the change in the vocabulary, not just in the words per se, because 99% of the words were already in use in the language. What changed was the relationship between the words. What changed was the way that the words were understood by the Arabs. And with that change, you saw a change in the society of the Arabs. That change was because they embraced those meanings, they embraced that new vocabulary, and that embrace was reflected in their thinking and in turn their behavior, and that's how the world changed. You know, you think about the Quran just immediately when the Quran says, ذلك بأن الله لم يقم مغيرا نعمات على قوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. And that is because Allah will never change the grace He bestowed upon the people until they change it themselves with what is in their own souls. Well, anfusahum, you know, when we think about soul, I gotta go this way because I know the trigger mentality that we have, a part of which in the language of Imam Muhammad he sought to correct for us. Because when we think about spirit, when we think about soul, we always think in these very ephemeral, cloudy kind of ways. But nafs means also personality. Nafs means personality. He said Allah will never change the grace He bestows upon the people until they change it themselves or what is in their personality. So you have to change your personality. Well, what gives us our personality? What gives us our personality is our vocabulary, the words we use, what those words mean, how we emphasize, what those words speak to as with regard to values, and therefore the things that we're attracted to, the things that we're repelled from. All that has to do with our vocabulary, what those words mean, and as I've said. And so, to change personality, you also have to change your language. There's an Oriental saying that says a person's true personality is hidden behind their tongue. Their true personality is hidden behind their tongue. So, our vocabulary actually represents our personality. So, one of the primary ways to change personality is change your vocabulary, change your language, right? You know, certain people that use certain words that they definitely tell you what their personality is. Well, this is the way. This is how it happens. You know, when you think about professionals, for example, you think about doctors, lawyers, engineers, dentists, professionals specifically. And you should understand that inside of every profession, there's a vocabulary in that profession. There's jargon in that profession. There's a lexicon for that profession. And when they go to school, they actually learn the language. They learn the language, the medical language, you know, engineering language, architectural language, the language, legal language. Learn that language, and they learn the language, and then, of course, they learn how that language applies in the field at work, right? Knowing which operations go with which terminology. Well, that's the connection. The connection is what the words mean and what you're supposed to do because of those words. And that was what we had and have in the life example of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And of course, prior to his example, we have the Quran that gave us the recipe which he exemplified before the world. So we have the language in the Quran, and we have the lab, or we have the behavior in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so then what happens when you have those who emulate his behavior, then we get the Muslim, we get the believer, we get the one who brings about this change, this transformation, because their personality has changed. One of the most obvious changes in personality was a change in Omar. Omar's personality changed in an instant because he was en route to assassinate the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then finally, without going into the whole story, finally when he got his hands on the Quran and read the Quran, he was transformed by it. All right. Well, this kind of transformation is just the nature of it. So the Sacred Life Project is just basically about understanding that formula, that dynamic, that recipe, and understanding how it applies across time, across geography, across ethnic groups, and how that is the way that Al-Islam transforms any and every people. The Asian world and ethnic group that where you have millions of Chinese Muslims, they were transformed in a certain way by Al-Islam, right? The Africans were transformed in a certain way by Al-Islam. The Europeans who became Muslim were transformed by Islam in a certain way. This is very, very important. In fact, I'll just mention it in concluding this because it's a tip and it's very, very useful. You should make sure you go and get this article. Go online and look for Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah. Omar Farouk Abdullah. He has a very important article on the cultural imperative. The cultural imperative, speaking about Al-Islam and the distinctions in the various Islamic international communities across time and across the globe, and understanding the validity of the distinctions of the practices of Al-Islam in the various locales. He begins his paper with an analogy of Al-Islam being like a river of clear water that flows over bedrock that's of different colors. And as it flows over that bedrock of different colors, the water takes on the color of the bedrock that is flowing over. So if the bedrock is black, then the water looks black. If the bedrock is white, then the water looks white. If the bedrock is red, yellow, etc., etc. And that's an apt analogy for how Al-Islam is. Al-Islam is the same. Al-Islam is universal. But Al-Islam is in some way inflected by the people who embrace Al-Islam. And it's valid. They have a valid embrace for Al-Islam. So any people who come to Al-Islam, and they have also a very particular way that Islam should be inflected by their reality. Al-Islam doesn't invite people to imitate other people who are already Muslim. Even if an Asian brought me the religion, Al-Islam, they taught me Al-Islam, they brought me to Shahadatain, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. Even if they did it, that doesn't mean I become an imitation Asian or an imitation Oriental. The bringing to Al-Islam is the bringing you to where you can actually be who God created you to be. That's what the Sacred Life Project is about. The Sacred Life Project is about learning Al-Islam in such a way that your personality is rightly reflected and rightly inflecting Al-Islam where Al-Islam allows it and permits it, so that what manifests as a result of your embrace of Al-Islam is a true human person that is rooted in your reality, your own reality. And that is the sacred life. If you're not living a life like that in Al-Islam, you're not living the sacred life. You're living somebody else's life. You're living a substitute life. You're an imitation something, right? So you have to know that you're grounded in your way of life. And that's what Imam Muhammad did. Imam Muhammad, his invitation, yes, he spoke to African Americans, by and large, in his audience, et cetera, more times than not. But he spoke to the world as well. And the invitation that he called people to was a universal call to Al-Islam. So many ways that could be illustrated. But we only have a few seconds. So the idea is just simply to understand that the transformation that is unique and particular to each ethnic group is what Al-Islam permits. And the Sacred Life Project is about informing those associated with the language, the logic, and the legacy of Imam Muhammad. How do we do that? Because he spoke to that. He illustrated that. He showed us how to do that. In our upcoming segments, we'll continue to say more about that. So, inshallah, God's peace be on you. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan Mubarak.